Miller, table 7. Jean-Pierre's voice, sharp as a shattered wine glass, cut through the restaurant's hushed symphony. Couldn't catch a break. Outside, Manhattan's lights blurred in the rain. Inside, Alistair Vance, Wall Street royalty, sat alone, always kind to her. Too kind. See, that's the thing they don't get. She saw his wallet fall, dark alligator leather swallowed by the plush carpet. When she picked it up, a photo slipped out. A little girl with scraped knees, a gap-toothed grin, herself. But here's the twist. Vance, this powerful man, looked haunted, not paternal. Her kindness had just stirred up a secret, a truth she couldn't even fathom yet. They have no idea how her quiet kindness will change everything. Every night she served champagne and smiles to people whose weekly wine budget could erase her debts. Working at one of New York's most exclusive restaurants. But one rainy Tuesday, a simple act of kindness, picking up a dropped wallet, would change everything. Inside the worn leather of a billionaire's wallet nestled between platinum credit cards, she saw a ghost. A little girl with a gap-toothed grin and scraped knees frozen in a sun-faded photograph. A little girl she knew intimately because that little girl was her. What followed was not a fairy tale reunion, but a descent into a 25-year-old lie that was darker and more twisted than she could ever have imagined. The relentless rhythm of the Gilded Sparrow was a symphony Clara Miller knew by heart. The soft clinking of Christopher silverware against Bernardo china. The murmur of hushed conversations weaving through the opulent velvet-draped dining room. The distant sizzle from the kitchen. It was the soundtrack to her exhaustion. For 3 years she had navigated this world of quiet luxury, a ghost in a crisp black uniform. Her own dreams deferred and tucked away like the tips she carefully folded into her apron pocket. Her life was a series of meticulously managed deficits. Sleep, money, hope. She lived in a 5th-floor walk up in Queens with 2 roommates in a symphony of her own. Sirens arguing neighbors and the constant drip of a faulty faucet. Her days were a blur of serving seared scallops and pouring vintage Bordeaux to people who wore the cost of her college tuition on their wrists. She was good at her job, efficient, observant, and invisible. It was a skill honed by a childhood spent in the New York foster care system, learning to be unobtrusive to not take up too much space. Tonight, a Tuesday was different, only in the intensity of the rain lashing against the floor-to-ceiling windows. The city lights of Manhattan blurred into a watercolor of neon and gold. Her station included Table 7, the coveted corner booth. Its occupant was Mr. Alistair Vance, a man whose name was a quiet institution in the city's financial circles. He was in his late 50s with a man of silver hair, kind eyes etched with faint lines of sorrow, and a presence that was commanding yet gentle. Unlike many of the restaurant's patrons, Mr. Vance was always kind. He looked at her, not through her. He called her. Clara Ara remembered she was studying art history online in her spare time, and always left a tip that made her rent day significantly less terrifying. He was a creature of a habit. He came every Tuesday alone, ordered the duck confit, a glass of Pinot Noir, and read a well-worn book of poetry. Tonight, as she approached his table to refill his water, he smiled warmly. "A dreadful night out there, Clara Ara. Thank you for your impeccable service as always." "It's my pleasure, Mr. Vance," she replied, her own smile, genuine for a rare moment. As he shifted to sign the bill, his movements were slightly stiff. His hands, usually so steady, fumbled. A dark alligator leather wallet slipped from his inner jacket pocket and fell silently onto the plush burgundy carpet. Neither of them noticed at first. He signed the check, nodded a final goodbye, and walked towards the exit, his form swallowed by the shadows of the foyer. Clara Ara moved to clear the table when her foot brushed against something soft. She looked down the wallet. Her heart gave a little lurch of panic. It was a cardinal rule. Never touch a customer's personal belongings, but leaving it there was unthinkable. Heart pounding, she scooped it up. It felt heavy, substantial, a world away from her own worn-out card holder. Her intention was to run to the front desk immediately, but as she held it, the clasp, weakened by years of use, popped open. The wallet fanned out in her hand, revealing a glimpse of its contents. A row of platinum and black credit cards, the crisp edge of a $100 bill, and on the left side a plastic sleeve, and in that sleeve was a photograph. Time seemed to slow down. The symphony of the restaurant faded into a dull hum. The photo was old, its colors washed out to a pale, sepia-toned memory. It showed a little girl no older than 5, sitting on a park bench. She wore a simple yellow sundress with a tiny smudge of what looked like chocolate on the collar. Her hair was a messy tumble of brown curls, and she was grinning a wide, unrestrained grin that showed a missing front tooth. Behind her, the blurry outline of the Central Park carousel was just visible. Clara Ara's breath hitched in her throat. Her blood ran cold. She knew that dress. Her foster mother, Mrs. Gable, had saved it for her, the only garment she'd arrived with as a toddler. She knew that missing tooth, the memory of it wiggling for a week before it finally came out, a phantom sensation from a life she could barely remember. She knew that tiny crescent-shaped scar just above her left eyebrow, the result of a clumsy fall from a tricycle. She knew everything about that little girl in the photograph. Because that little girl was her mind reeled a maelstrom of confusion and disbelief. How? Why? Why would Alistair Vance, a billionaire titan of industry, a kind but distant stranger, be carrying a faded photograph of her as a child in his wallet, a photo she herself had never seen? The questions crashed over her in a tidal wave, leaving her breathless and shaking in the middle of the most expensive restaurant in New York City, holding a truth that felt more impossible than any dream she had ever dared to have. The world snapped back into focus with the sharp voice of her manager, Jean-Pierre. Miller Table 7 isn't going to clear itself. Clara flinched quickly, snapping the wallet shut. Her hands trembled so violently she nearly dropped it again, stuffing it into her apron pocket, the worn leather feeling like a hot coal against her hip. She mechanically cleared the table, her mind a million miles away. Each plate she stacked felt impossibly heavy. Each glass was a blur. For the rest of her shift, she moved like an automaton. The photo was seared onto the inside of her eyelids. The gap-toothed grin, the yellow dress, her own forgotten face staring back at her from a billionaire's wallet. The implications were too vast, too terrifying to contemplate. Was he her father, a long-lost relative, or something far more sinister? The foster system was a black hole of missing information. Her file was a thin collection of sterile documents with no mention of family, only a note saying she was found after a tragic accident. When her shift finally ended at 1 a.m., she didn't go home. She couldn't face the dripping faucet and her roommates' questions. Instead, she walked. The rain had softened to a fine mist clinging to her hair and jacket. She walked for hours, the weight of the wallet in her pocket, a constant nagging presence. By the time the first gray light of dawn broke over the East River, she had made a decision. She couldn't live with the not knowing. She found Vance's company, Vance Capital, in a sleek glass tower in Midtown that scraped the clouds. She knew it was insane. A waitress couldn't just walk in and demand to see one of the most powerful men in the city, but the girl in the photograph deserved an answer. Clara, looking haggarded in her wrinkled uniform from the night before, was predictably stopped by a formidable security guard in the lobby. "Can I help you, miss?" he asked, his tone dripping with dismissal. "I need to see Mr. Alistair Vance," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "It's personal. I have something of his." She held up the wallet. The guard's expression shifted from disdain to professional urgency. He made a call. Minutes later, a woman in a severe black suit appeared, her expression unreadable. "I'm Mr. Vance's executive assistant. Please follow me." Clara was led into a silent, high-speed elevator that whisked her up to the penthouse floor. The doors opened onto a space that was less an office and more a modern art gallery. White walls, minimalist furniture, and a panoramic view of Central Park that stole her breath. And there, standing by the window, silhouetted against the morning sky, was Alistair Vance. He turned, and for the first time, the kindness in his eyes was replaced by an expression of profound shock and something that looked like fear. "Clara," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I believe this is yours," she said, her hand shaking as she held out the wallet. He crossed the vast room and took it from her, his fingers brushing against hers. He didn't check its contents. He didn't have to. His gaze was locked on her face, searching, assessing. The silence stretched thick with unspoken questions. Finally, she broke it, her voice cracking. The photograph inside the little girl. That's me. Why do you have it? Who are you? Alistair Vance seemed to age a decade before her eyes. The powerful CEO vanished, replaced by a weary, haunted man. He gestured towards a leather sofa. Please sit down. He didn't sit opposite her, but next to her, creating an unexpected intimacy. He opened the wallet and looked at the photo, his thumb gently stroking the plastic sleeve. Her name was Clara Ara, he said softly. Clara Ara Miller. He looked up at her, his eyes glistening. Your father, David Miller, was my best friend. More than a friend. He was my business partner. We started this company together from a garage in Brooklyn. Clara Ara's mind blanked. Her father. She had never even known his name. David Miller. The name felt foreign. Alien. What happened to him? She asked, her voice tight. Alistair's face clouded with a deep abiding pain. There was an accident, a car crash 25 years ago. It was late. The roads were slick with rain. A drunk driver ran a red light. Your father and your mother, Laura, they didn't survive. The clinical words of her foster file, tragic accident, were suddenly given a face, a name, a story. Tears pricked her eyes, not of grief for people she never knew, but for the lifetime of questions she had carried. And me, she whispered. You were in the back seat in your car seat. By some miracle, you were almost unharmed, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I was the first person the police called. I rushed to the hospital, but I was a mess. My own wife had passed away from cancer only 6 months prior. I was childless, grieving, completely lost. The state, social services, they took custody. I was in no shape to be a guardian. I was told you'd be placed with a loving family. I convinced myself it was for the best, that you'd have a clean slate, a normal life away from all that tragedy. He looked at her, his eyes pleading for understanding. I was a coward, Clara Ara. I should have done more. I lost touch, and by the time I tried to find you years later, the records were sealed. All I had left of them was this photograph. I've carried it every day for 25 years. A reminder of my best friend and of my greatest failure. The story was seamless. It was tragic. It explained everything. And yet, a tiny dissonant chord vibrated in the back of Clara Ara's mind. Why did he look not just sad, but frightened when he first saw her seeing you at the restaurant? It was like seeing a ghost. He continued, seeming to read her mind. I recognized you almost instantly. The shape of your eyes, your smile. I wanted to say something, but how could I? What right did I have to disrupt your life after all these years of silence? Clara Ara was overwhelmed, drowning in a sea of revelations. Her father's name was David. He was a co-founder of this empire. She wasn't just an orphan, she was the daughter of a man who built this very tower. Alistair seemed to sense her turmoil. I know this is a shock. It's not enough, but I want to make amends. Your father was owed half of this company. His name was erased from the records after the accident, a complicated legal maneuver to keep the company from dissolving. But his legacy, your legacy, is here. He stood up and walked to his desk. This isn't charity. This is your birthright. I want to offer you a job here at the Vance Foundation, our philanthropic arm. It's a position as a project coordinator. The salary would change your life. It would give you a chance to learn about the world your father helped build. Please, Clara, let me do this one thing right. It was a dizzying proposition, a 6-figure salary, a corner office, a life she couldn't even fathom. It was an apology wrapped in a golden cage. Her instinct screamed that something was still wrong, that the story was too neat, the edges too smooth. But the exhaustion of her current life, the crushing weight of her debts, the sheer intoxicating pull of this new reality was stronger. She looked at the man who claimed to be her father's best friend, a man carrying a photograph of her childhood like a sacred relic. Okay, she heard herself say the single words sealing her fate. I accept. The transition from the Gilded Sparrow to the 80th floor of Vance Capital was like stepping into another dimension. Clara Ara's world, once scented with floor polish and simmering sauces, was now perfumed with the subtle, expensive smell of old leather and fresh-cut flowers. Her worn-out, non-slip shoes were replaced by designer heels she'd bought in a daze, and her black uniform was swapped for tailored business attire that felt like a costume. The Vance Foundation was the heart of the company's public image, a sprawling, sun-drenched space with glass walls and views that seemed to stretch to the end of the world. Her new job was real, her task concrete. She coordinated grants for arts programs in underserved communities, a role that touched upon her own passions. Alistair was true to his word. He became a gentle, almost paternal mentor, guiding her through this alien landscape of board meetings and donor luncheons. He told her stories about her father, his laugh, his brilliant mind, his terrible taste in music. For the first time, Clara Ara had a history, a connection to a past that wasn't just a blank page. Yet the dissonant chord she'd felt in his office never fully faded. It hummed beneath the surface of this perfect new life. She noticed things. The way certain older executives would stare at her for a moment too long, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and unease. The way Alistair's jovial demeanor would occasionally slip when he thought she wasn't looking, revealing a deep-seated anxiety. And then there was Julian Croft. Croft was Alistair's second-in-command, a man with the cold, predatory stillness of a shark. He was handsome in a severe way, with piercing blue eyes and a perfectly tailored suit that seemed like an extension of his own rigid form. He was the only one who didn't treat Clara Ara with a kind of gentle deference. He watched her with an unnerving, analytical gaze, as if she were a variable in an equation he was trying to solve. "It's remarkable," he said to her one afternoon, catching her by the coffee station. His voice was smooth-cultured, but held no warmth. "Alistair has been searching for a way to honor David's memory for years, and then you just appear. It's almost miraculous." The word miraculous was laced with something that sounded like sarcasm or perhaps a warning. "I was as surprised as anyone," Clara replied, keeping her tone neutral. "I'm sure," Croft said, his lips curling into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "David was a dreamer. Alistair is the pragmatist. It's what made them a formidable team. It's a tragedy he never got to see all this." He gestured vaguely at the opulent office. A real tragedy. With a curt nod, he was gone, leaving Clara Ara with a chill that had nothing to do with the office air conditioning. The strangest part of her new life, however, revolved around someone she had yet to meet, Alistair's daughter, Serafina Vance. Her presence was everywhere. A framed photo on Alistair's desk showed a young woman with a radiant smile in the same dark curly hair as Clara Ara. She was an equestrian, a philanthropist, a society darling whose life was chronicled in glossy magazines. Alistair spoke of her with a mixture of fierce pride and overwhelming love. She was studying art conservation in London and was due to return to New York soon. The first time Clara Ara saw her in person was a complete accident. Clara Ara was leaving the office late one evening when the private elevator doors opened. Out stepped Alistair, followed by a young woman who was laughing at something he'd said. Clara Ara froze. It was like looking into a distorted mirror. Serafina Vance was her, but not her. She had the same dark curly hair, though hers was styled into a glossy, perfect cascade. She had the same brown eyes, the same nose, the same curve of her smile, but her skin was luminous. Her posture was perfect, and she wore a simple cream-colored dress that probably cost more than Clara Ara's monthly salary. She was a polished, refined, flawless version of Clara Ara. Serafina's laughter did when she saw Clara Ara. Her eyes widened, a flicker of confusion crossing her face. Alistair's face went pale. He quickly recovered, forcing a smile. "Serafina, darling, you're early. This is Clara Miller, a new project coordinator at the foundation. Clara, this is my daughter Serafina. It's a pleasure to meet you." Serafina said, her voice, a soft, melodic version of Clara's own. She extended a hand, and as Clara took it, she felt a bizarre jolt, a static shock of recognition. "You too," Clara managed to say, her throat dry. "Miller," Serafina mused, her head tilting. "That's funny. My mother's maiden name was Miller." She gave a little laugh, oblivious. "What a coincidence." Alistair quickly steered Serafina away. "We'll be late for our reservation, sweetie." He glanced back at Clara, his eyes filled with a desperate, panicked plea. "Don't say anything." Clara stood rooted to the spot long after they had gone. It wasn't just a resemblance. It was a mirror image. The way Serafina tilted her head, the nervous habit she had of twisting the silver ring on her pinky finger. It was the same nervous habit Clara had, twisting a cheap silver band she'd bought at a street fair. The story Alistair had told her, the neat, tragic tale of a lost friend and a guilty conscience, began to fray at the edges. Coincidences this perfect didn't exist. This wasn't just about her father. This was about Serafina. That night she couldn't sleep. She sat in her small queen's apartment, the city lights, a distant mocking twinkle. She pulled out the one thing she had from her past, the only possession that came with her into the foster system. A small, worn baby blanket, its satin trim frayed. In the corner was a faded embroidered monogram, an ornate letter C. Her name was Clara. But what if the C stood for something else? What if she wasn't the only one? The questions spiraled, each one more terrifying than the last. Why would Alistair lie? Why hide the fact that she was a carbon copy of his daughter? The dissonant hum in her mind had become a deafening roar. She was no longer just searching for her past. She was investigating a lie, and Alistair Vance was at the heart of it. And for the first time, she realized that the truth he was hiding might not just be tragic, but dangerous. The uncanny resemblance to Serafina became a splinter in Clara's mind, impossible to ignore. Every interaction, every memory was now cast in a new suspicious light. Alistair's kindness felt like a performance, Julian Croft's coldness like a threat, and Serafina's oblivious warmth like a tragedy in the making. Clara needed more than just a gut feeling. She needed proof. Her first stop was the person who knew more about her past than anyone, Mrs. Gable, her last foster mother. She was a kind, no-nonsense woman who now lived in a small, tidy house in Staten Island. Clara took the ferry on a Saturday, the city skyline shrinking behind her, feeling as if she were traveling back in time. Mrs. Gable welcomed her with a warm hug and a cup of tea. She had always been Clara's staunchest supporter, the closest thing to a mother she'd ever known. "You look different, dear," Mrs. Gable said, studying her. "The weight of the world seems a little lighter on your shoulders. This new job is good for you." "It's complicated," Clara admitted. She hesitated, then took the plunge. "Mrs. Gable, when I first came to you, what did you know about me? About my family?" The older woman sighed, her expression softening with pity. "Not much, honey. The file was thin. Just that you were a ward of the state, survivor of a car accident that claimed your parents, no known relatives. That was it. Was there anything else? Anything at all? A piece of paper? A toy? Anything?" Clara pressed, her desperation mounting. Mrs. Gable thought for a moment, then her eyes lit up faintly. "There was one thing, not in the file. It was just a note tucked into your blanket. I always thought it was an administrative error, so I never mentioned it. I might still have it in your box." She bustled off and returned with a small cardboard box filled with Clara's childhood drawings and school reports. At the very bottom was a yellowed piece of paper, a hospital intake form. It listed an infant Jane Doe admitted for observation. But what made Clara's blood run cold was a handwritten note scrolled in the margin by a nurse. "Twin B admitted stable. Twin A due for parents. Coroner notified. Twin B, Twin A dead on arrival." The words swam before Clara's eyes. Twin. She had a twin sister. A sister who had supposedly died in the crash. "Oh, honey, I'm so sorry," Mrs. Gable said, seeing the look on Clara's face. "I thought it was a mistake, a mix-up with another patient. I shouldn't have shown you." But Clara knew it wasn't a mistake. It was the missing piece. She wasn't just an orphan, she was a twin whose sister had been torn from her. But her sister wasn't dead. She was alive, living in a penthouse with a different name. The next step was harder, requiring a descent into the city's bureaucratic labyrinth. Armed with her own birth date and her parents' names, David and Laura Miller. Thanks to Alistair's partial truth, she went to the New York City Department of Records. It took days of navigating indifferent clerks and dusty archives, but finally a weary employee handed her a grainy microfilm reel. She scrolled through the records, her heart pounding in her chest, and then she found it. The birth certificate for Clara Ara Miller, born at New York Presbyterian Hospital. And right below it, filed on the same day, was another entry. Celeste Miller, born to David and Laura Miller, 3 minutes after her sister Clara Ara. Celeste. The name echoed in her mind. Where had she heard it before? Then it hit her with the force of a physical blow. A society magazine she'd flipped through in the office reception area. A feature on Serafina Vance. Her full name, Serafina Celeste Vance. The lie was no longer just a suspicion. It was a monstrous, undeniable truth. Alistair hadn't just failed to save his best friend's daughter. He had stolen one of them. He had taken Celeste, renamed her Serafina, and raised her as his own while leaving Clara Ara Twin B to be swallowed by the system. He hadn't just erased his partner's name from the company. He had erased a child's entire existence. The final piece of the puzzle lay in the accident itself. Clara Ara filed a request for the 25-year-old police report. When the file finally arrived, it was thin, the details sparse. A tragic accident on the West Side Highway. A drunk driver who was also killed in the crash. But one detail stood out, a name she recognized with a jolt of ice-cold dread. The primary witness on the scene, the one who identified the bodies of David and Laura Miller, the one who spoke to the first responders about the surviving infant, was not Alistair Vance. It was Julian Croft. Croft had been there. He had been a junior associate at the time, Alistair's protege. He had been part of the lie from the very beginning. His cold, watchful eyes suddenly made perfect sense. He wasn't just watching a new employee. He was guarding a secret he had helped create. Clara Ara sat in her tiny apartment. The documents spread out before her like the debris of a shipwreck. The birth certificates, the hospital note, the police report. It was a story of breathtaking cruelty. Her parents were gone. Her identity had been fractured. Her own twin sister was a stranger who wore her face. The gilded cage Alistair had built for her was no longer a place of opportunity. It was a prison built on a foundation of lies. And she now knew she couldn't just accept it. She had to tear it down. The confrontation with Alistair was no longer a matter of if, but when. And this time she wouldn't be asking questions. She would be demanding answers, armed with the undeniable, heartbreaking truth. The sky over Manhattan was the color of bruised plums threatening a storm that mirrored the tempest brewing inside Clara. She requested a meeting with Alistair under the guise of discussing a new foundation project. Her voice on the phone, a carefully controlled monotone that betrayed none of her inner turmoil. She found him in his penthouse office, the same place where he had fed her the carefully curated story of his grief and failure. He was staring out at the city, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. He looked tired, older than he had just weeks ago. "Clara," he said, turning with a gentle smile that now seemed grotesque to her. "Thank you for coming up. What can I do for you?" She didn't speak. Instead, she walked to his expansive mahogany desk and laid the documents out one by one like playing cards in a game with impossibly high stakes. First, the copy of her birth certificate. Next to it, the certificate for Celeste Miller. Then, the hospital intake note with the nurse's scroll, Twin B. Finally, the police report with Julian Croft's name circled in red ink. Alistair stared at the papers, the color draining from his face. His hand trembled, and he placed the glass down with a heavy thud. The smile vanished, replaced by the same raw, cornered fear she had seen in his eyes that first day in the lobby. The facade he had maintained for 25 years crumbled in an instant. How was all he could manage his voice a hoarse whisper? "Does it matter?" Clara Ara shot back her voice low and trembling, with a rage she had held in check for days. "You told me my father was your best friend. Was this how you honored him? By tearing his family apart? By stealing his daughter and throwing the other one away like she was nothing?" He sank into his chair, his head in his hands. The powerful titan of industry was gone, replaced, behold, by a broken old man. When he looked up, his eyes were swimming in unshed tears. "You don't understand." "Oh, I think I understand perfectly," she said, her voice rising. You saw an opportunity. Your wife had died. You were childless. You saw two identical baby girls, and you took the one you wanted. You took Celeste. What happened to Clara Ara? Was she just collateral damage? A loose end you couldn't be bothered to tie up? No, he cried out the word. A raw wound. That's not how it was. He took a ragged breath, the confession spilling out of him as if a dam had finally broken. The accident. It wasn't just your parents, Clara Ara. My wife, Elena, she didn't die of cancer 6 months earlier. That was a lie I told to simplify things. She was in the car with them. Clara Ara recoiled as if struck. David had made a breakthrough. A Leicester continued, his voice heavy with the weight of memory, a predictive algorithm for the market that was revolutionary, borderline genius. But it was risky. I wanted to be cautious. David wanted to go Allen. We argued. It was the worst fight we ever had. He and Laura and Elena, who was trying to play peacemaker. They drove off to cool down. You and Celeste was in the back. He choked on a sob. I was following them, trying to apologize. I saw the whole thing. The truck running the light. The impact. It was apocalyptic. By the time I got to the car, David, Laura, Elena, they were all gone. But in the back seat amidst the wreckage, you two were crying. You were both alive. He looked at Clara Ara, his eyes pleading. In that moment, I lost everyone. My best friend, his wife, and my own wife. My entire world was gone. And then I looked at you, too, and I broke. I saw a chance to save a piece of them, a piece of her. Eleanor and I, we couldn't have children. It was the great sorrow of our lives when I saw you both perfect innocent. I made a decision, a terrible, selfish, monstrous decision born of grief. He gestured to the police report. Julian was just a kid, my intern. He arrived right after me. He idolized me. I told him what to do. He spoke to the police. He told them there was one baby. He held Celeste while the paramedics checked on you. When they took you to the ambulance, we just left with her. We walked away. I told myself I was saving her from a life of tragedy from the orphanage system. I told myself you would be fine, that you'd be adopted quickly. I told myself 1,000 lies to justify the one unforgivable truth. He stood and walked to the window, his back to her. I named her Serafina, but I gave her the middle name Celeste to honor the truth I was trying to bury. Every day for 25 years, I have seen your father's eyes in her face, and every night I have wondered what happened to the other little girl, the one I abandoned. I was a coward. I was a monster. But I loved your father, Clara, and I swear to you, I have loved Serafina with all my broken heart. The confession hung in the air, thick and suffocating. It wasn't a story of simple greed, but a tangled knot of grief, love, and profound moral failure. Clara Ara's rage was now complicated by a flicker of something else. Not forgiveness, but a devastating understanding of the human capacity for selfishness in the face of unbearable pain. Her sister wasn't just a stranger. She was the living embodiment of a Leicester's grief for his own wife, and Clara Ara was the ghost of his guilt. What about Julian? She asked, her voice quiet now. Why is he still here? Why is he so high up in the company? Alistair turned from the window, his face a mask of weary resignation. Because he knows everything. He's not just my right-hand man, Clara Ara. He's been my gatekeeper, my co-conspirator. His loyalty was bought with a lifetime of promotions and power. He has as much to lose from this coming out as I do. A cold realization washed over Clara Ara. Julian Croft wasn't just a guard dog for Alistair's secret. He was a partner in the crime, and she, the ghost, who had returned to haunt them, was now a threat to them both. The confession changed the very air in Vance Capital. What was once a place of intimidating luxury now felt like a gilded mausoleum, each hallway echoing with the ghosts of a 25-year-old lie. Clara Ara continued to go to work the routine, a flimsy shield against the chaos raging within her. She was trapped in a state of surreal suspension, possessing a truth so monumental it could shatter lives, yet uncertain of how to wield it. Her relationship with Leicester was now a fragile, bizarre dance. His paternal kindness was replaced by a raw, desperate penitence. He would leave files on her desk with detailed histories of her father's early contributions to the company, as if offering up pieces of the past could atone for the life he'd stolen. But Clara Ara kept her distance, her emotions a rowing sea of anger, pity, and profound confusion. How could she hate a man who was also the only living link to her parents? Serafina remained the innocent center of the storm. Unaware of the drama unfolding around her, she made efforts to befriend Clara Ara. "It's so lovely having another woman in the foundation who's actually passionate about art," she'd say, inviting Clara Ara to lunch or a gallery opening. Each interaction was a fresh torment for Clara Ara, a glimpse of the easy sisterly bond they should have had. She saw her own gestures mirrored in Serafina, heard her own laugh, and felt a pang of jealousy so sharp it was physically painful. This was the life she could have had, one of privilege, security, and love. But as the days turned into weeks, a new, more sinister element began to creep in. The chills she felt around Julian Croft intensified, solidifying into a palpable threat. His surveillance was no longer passive. He began to appear wherever she was, by the elevator in the parking garage at the cafe where she bought her morning coffee. He never said anything overtly threatening, but his presence was a constant, unnerving reminder that he was a keeper of the secret, and he would not let it go easily. The intimidation became less subtle. A crucial file for a grant proposal vanished from her desk, only to reappear hours later after she had frantically recreated the work. An IT issue caused her entire computer to wipe its memory, and the tech support team could find no explanation. One evening as she was walking to the subway, a black town car accelerated and swerved towards the curb, its horn blaring, forcing her to leap back onto the sidewalk. It sped away before she could see the driver, but she knew with a certainty that chilled her to the bone who was behind it. She confronted Alistair, her voice shaking with a mixture of fear and fury. "This is Julian, isn't it? He's trying to scare me away." Alistair, who had seemed to be shrinking under the weight of his guilt, suddenly looked energized by a new fear. "He wouldn't dare," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. "Wouldn't he?" Clara Ara challenged. "He has everything to lose. He built his entire career on this lie. He's not like you, Alistair. I don't see an ounce of guilt in him. I only see ambition." That conversation seemed to awaken something in Alistair. He began to look at Julian not as his loyal subordinate, but as the threat he truly was. He started digging, pulling old financial records, revisiting the details of the risky venture that had caused the fateful argument with David Miller. What he found was more disturbing than he could have imagined. He called Clara Ara to his office late one night. The room was dark, save for a single lamp casting long shadows on his desk, which was littered with documents. "It wasn't just a disagreement over risk," Alistair said, his voice grim. "David had discovered something. Julian. He was skimming, setting up shell corporations to siphon funds from our seed money. The risky venture was a smokescreen he created to cover his tracks. David found out the argument we had. It wasn't about business strategy. I was accusing David of being reckless, but he was trying to warn me about Julian." The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. "So the accident," Clara Ara whispered, "the drunk driver was real." Alistair said, his face ashen. "It was a tragic random coincidence that gave Julian the perfect opportunity. But if that truck hadn't run the red light, David was going to expose Julian the next day. The accident didn't just kill my wife and my best friend. It saved Julian Croft's son. And he has been using his knowledge of what I did that night to keep me silent about his own crimes ever since. He's been blackmailing me for 25 years, not with words, but with his silence." The entire story had shifted again. Julian wasn't just a co-conspirator in a moment of grief-stricken madness. He was a cold-blooded criminal who had profited from tragedy, leveraging Alistair's guilt to build his own empire within the company. Suddenly, the threat felt infinitely more real. Julian wasn't just trying to protect a secret about Serafina and Clara Ara. He was protecting himself from a prison sentence for massive fraud. A man like that wouldn't stop at a few veiled threats. Clara Ara wasn't just an inconvenience. She was the one person who could bring his entire world crashing down. The next day, Clara Ara arrived at her office to find an envelope on her chair. No name, no return address. Inside was a single glossy photograph. It was a recent picture taken from a distance of Mrs. Gable, her foster mother, tending to the roses in her front garden in Staten Island. There was no note. There didn't need to be. The message was crystal clear. We know who you care about. Back off, or they will get hurt. The time for quiet contemplation was over. This was no longer just about the past. It was about survival. The photograph of Mrs. Gable was a declaration of war. The fear it ignited in Clara Ara burned away any remaining hesitation. This was no longer just her fight. Julian had crossed a line, threatening the only person who had ever shown her consistent motherly love. She stormed into Alistair's office, the photo slapping down on his desk like a thrown gauntlet. He's threatening her, she said, her voice a low, dangerous growl. He's threatening an innocent old woman. This ends now. For the first time since the confession, the weary, guilt-ridden Alistair Vance was gone. In his place stood the titan of industry she had first read about, his eyes blazing with a cold, protective fury. The threat to Clara and now to Mrs. Gable had finally forced him to choose between self-preservation and redemption. You're right, he said, his voice firm. He's leveraged my shame for the last time. I've spent half my life living in a prison of my own making. It's time to burn it down. The plan they formulated was audacious and fraught with risk. It couldn't be a quiet firing. Julian was too deeply embedded, his network too vast. He had to be exposed publicly, unequivocally, leaving him no room to maneuver. Alistair called an emergency meeting of the Vance Capital Board of Directors for the following morning. The stated reason was a surprise Q3 performance review. The real reason was to detonate a 25-year-old bomb. That evening was the hardest of Clara Ara's life. Alistair insisted on telling Serafina the truth himself before she heard it in a boardroom. Clara Ara waited in Alistair's cavernous apartment, pacing the marble floors while he spoke to the daughter he had raised in the library. She couldn't hear the words, but she heard a single shattered cry, followed by a long, heavy silence. When they emerged, Serafina's face was pale, and tears streaked her eyes red-rimmed. She looked at Clara Ara, not with the easy warmth of before, but with a bewildered, wounded expression. It was the look of someone whose entire reality had been ripped away. There were no hugs, no instant sisterly bond. There was only the raw, gaping wound of the truth. Is it true? She asked Clara Ara, her voice a fragile whisper. Are you really? Yes, Clara Ara said softly. My name is Clara Ara Miller, and I believe yours is Celeste Miller. The name hung in the air between them both, a greeting and an epitaph for the life Serafina had known. The next morning, the boardroom at Vance Capital was tense. The board members, a collection of the city's most powerful men and women, murmured in confusion, surprised by the unscheduled meeting. Julian Croft sat at Alistair's right hand, a picture of calm confidence, clearly believing the meeting was his own initiative to oust a distracted and aging Alistair. Alistair entered the room, but he wasn't alone. Flanked by Clara and a stone-faced Serafina, he walked to the head of the table. Thank you all for coming, he began, his voice ringing with an authority no one had heard in years. I have not called this meeting to discuss third-quarter earnings. I have called it to correct a lie that has sat at the heart of this company since its inception. He began to speak. He told them about David Miller, his true co-founder. He told them about the brilliant algorithm, the argument, and the accident. And then, his voice cracking but resolute, he told them about Clara and Celeste. He confessed to his own unforgivable act, the theft of a child, in a moment of unbearable grief. A wave of shock and disbelief rippled through the room. Clara Ara watched Julian. His confident smirk had frozen, replaced by a mask of tightening fury as he realized what was happening. But my personal failure is only half the story. Alistair continued his gaze, locking onto his second-in-command. The lie I told that night allowed another more insidious lie to fester. David Miller didn't just disagree with me on business strategy. He had discovered that our star protégé, Mr. Julian Croft, was a common thief embezzling funds from the company he was pretending to help build. He signaled to his assistant, and a screen behind him lit up, displaying bank statements, transaction logs, and the intricate web of shell corporations Julian had created. The evidence was damning, undeniable. Julian leaped to his feet. This is slander lies from a senile old man trying to cover his own tracks. He's confessing to kidnapping for God's sake. He's insane. Am I? Alistair counted calmly. Fortunately, David was meticulous. He kept a backup of his research, a data drive he mailed to his lawyer for safekeeping the day before he died with instructions to release it if anything happened to him. The lawyer retired, but his firm recently unearthed it during an office move. It contains all the proof of your fraud, Julian, and a sworn affidavit from David, stating his intent to expose you. It was the final devastating blow. Julian's face contorted in a mask of pure rage and panic. He looked from the board members' horrified faces to Clara. His eyes filled with venom. He saw the source of his downfall. You! He spat, taking a step towards her. Before he could take another, the boardroom doors opened and two uniformed NYPD officers, accompanied by a pair of detectives in suits, walked in. Julian Croft, one of the detectives said, his voice cutting through the silence. You're under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. It was over. The public unmasking was absolute as they cuffed a stunned and sputtering Julian Alistair. Vance looked at the board. I will be resigning as CEO effective immediately. I will cooperate fully with the authorities regarding my own actions in the matter of my daughters. The board will elect my successor. My only request is that you restore David Miller's name as a founding partner of this company. It's long past time. In the silent, shocked aftermath, Clara and Serafina stood near the window, looking out over the city. Below them, a police car pulled away from the curb, carrying Julian Croft and his 25 years of secrets. There was no easy resolution, no joyful embrace. They were sisters, but they were also strangers, their lives irrevocably shattered and intertwined. I don't know who I am anymore, Serafina whispered, watching the city below. Neither do I, Clara replied, her voice steady. But for the first time, I think we get to find out together. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with therapy, legal battles, and the monumental task of forging a relationship from the ashes of a lie. But as they stood there, two halves of a whole, watching the storm clouds finally begin to part over Manhattan, there was a flicker not of a happy ending, but of a real hard one beginning. The story of Clara and Serafina isn't a fairy tale. It's a raw, powerful reminder that the truth, no matter how long it's buried, always finds a way to the surface. It's about the devastating consequences of a single choice born from grief and the quiet strength it takes to reclaim a life that was stolen from you. Their journey to becoming sisters has only just begun, and the scars of the past will never fully fade. But in their shared future, there is finally a glimmer of hope, a chance to build something real and lasting on the ruins of a billionaire's lie. What would you have done in Clara's shoes? How can a family ever truly heal from such a deep and calculated betrayal? If this story of hidden secrets and the unbreakable bond of blood resonated with you, please take a moment to hit that like button to let us know. Share it with someone who loves a story that keeps you guessing until the very end. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you never miss another tale that reveals the extraordinary secrets hidden in ordinary lives. Thank you for listening.